Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast. My name is Jacob Paveo, and I come to you every single Tuesday, hopefully as of this week, on all of your favorite podcasting platforms from Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and of course, our home resort, the Podbean app. And this is the show that you need to listen to. I come to you every week with all of the news you need to know about, giving it a fun little comedic spin to some of it. As well, we have some serious discussions to be had, and hopefully there is something for everyone to learn. So, what went down this week? Well, it was the State of the Union in the United States, and we were finally able to see a large group of white people stare across the aisle at a group of new, darker-skinned immigrants who don't yet understand the protocol. But enough about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding. This weekend was also the Grammy Awards. The big moment coming when Cardi B won for Rap Album of the Year. And she had a great album. It was my favorite album of the year, called Invasion of Privacy. And it is so cool how a stripper whose privates were invaded for years can turn her life around and then win a Grammy. It's just so cool. Lastly, today in Canadian politics, things are going a little bit wild. I've been talking to people for the last hour or so because Cabinet Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould is stepping down amid allegations that the Prime Minister's office pressured her to assist in a case with a Quebec-based engineering firm, allowing them to avoid criminal prosecution. Now, this could be the big story that takes down the Liberal government. It's that substantial, but this is a breaking story, and it really only happened about an hour before recording, and so far there's not really much information out that we can talk about, so we are going to have to wait for more to come out about this later this week. Now, if you hear anything in the show that you want to talk about, you can hit me up on Twitter at Jacob Paveo. You can hit me up on Instagram at Jacob_Paveo. That's Jacob, last name Pavao. And don't forget, on Instagram, there's an underscore in the middle. You can also reach me on the contact page of the website, laughtolearnpodcast.com. That's all spelt out, all one word, laughtolearnpodcast.com. Once again, the contact page. That's also the homepage where I'm going to start posting some blog stuff eventually. There's also 2 photos of me so you can look at me. And right now, I'm wearing the same sweater that I was wearing for all of those photos. So, I look good in the photos, and I guess I look good right now. At least from, waist to shoulder. I can say for sure that I look good. So, stick around, because this is going to be a fun episode. One of the biggest stories coming out of this past week was that a Quebec-based Superior Court judge handed a 40-year minimum sentence to the Quebec City mosque shooter, whose name should only be mentioned when you are about to spit. And quite frankly, I enjoy the cleanliness of my floors right now, so I will not be mentioning his name. But perhaps you should remember that a few years ago, we had a string of terror attacks, one after another. This one was conducted by a white male against a mosque in Quebec City. and at the age of 29 right now, he'll be eligible for parole after 40 years. He's already served 2, so he has 38 more years to go, and that'll be long after any woman would be willing to take his virginity. The interesting part to this story, though, is the judge's decision to agree with the defense that allowing consecutive sentences to be served, which is to say serving one sentence for each murder at a time, which would have allowed him to be in prison for up to 150 years. So that means if you murder one person, you get 25 years. If you murder a second person, they add 25 years at the end of those 25 years, making it 50 years. So he would have been eligible to be sentenced up to 150 years in prison. And the judge actually agreed with the defense that this was unconstitutional and went against the protections for cruel and unusual punishment. Instead, he sentenced him to serve all sentences concurrently. That is to say, he is serving 6 25-year sentences all at the same time. And the criminal code allows a judge to add 15 years due to the extreme circumstance and lack of remorse shown by this domestic terrorist, meaning, of course, that he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Since 2011, the criminal code was changed to allow for consecutive sentences for multiple murders, and it allows the judge to determine if it should be consecutive or concurrent based on the character of the offender, the nature of the offense, and the circumstances surrounding its commission. Now, it's actually used quite seldomly. Only 4 individuals have ever been sentenced in Canada to serve consecutive sentences. And it's an estimated number of 4. It's not an official number of 4 because the government's never released that number, but all of our news agencies agree on the number being 4. I'm going to stick with it because we would likely have heard about another mass murderer who had been given I guess not given the opportunity to, but forced to serve consecutive sentences. And the most currently that an individual is serving for is 75 consecutive years. And we've seen in other high-profile cases, such as most recently with the gay mass murderer, also, as I just said, he was sentenced this week, and his name also need only be mentioned to let the gay men in prison know of his arrival. That judge shown a reluctance to allow for consecutive sentences as well, although he made no direct mention of it. The case in Quebec, the judge did make direct reference to consecutive against concurrent sentencing. Judges seem to prefer to hand out concurrent sentences in hopes of a reformative period in prison rather than a sort of vitriolic one. They're hoping that with the idea that one day you may be let out, it'll give you some sort of chance to reform yourself while inside. Now, I understand where the judges are coming from. They interpret consecutive sentences as cruel and unusual, which they very well may be. I have never conformed to the opinion that any life-ending crime should necessarily result in a life-ending punishment. And if that individual can be reformed, they may be able to do great things for their community. I need only point to someone like Majid Nawaz in the UK, who was convicted of preaching an Islamist perspective in Egypt, only to serve 4 years in prison and now spend the rest of his life teaching against religious extremism. After he spent all this time in prison, discussed with real murderers their religious beliefs, and he actually taught himself the error in his way. We seem to be at the point where we are searching for the fine line between appropriate punishment and overuse of government power. And much like Jeff Bezos' penis, we are all soon going to be forced to decide whether or not to look at this as a small problem or to allow it to pass us by and hope that we aren't missing something enormously important. Now, I want to get through some of the big news stories this week that we don't have time to go into any great detail about, and I want to start by coming back around to the State of the Union. Now, this is the first official State of the Union. Last time, they gave it a different word because to be a State of the Union, they have to meet certain criteria in the House, and I guess they didn't last year, and now this year they did. So technically, this is Trump's first State of the Union, although it's really his second, and no one really understands what's going on. At least I don't really understand what's going on. But either way, we had ourselves a State of the Union. Now, other than the speech itself, which was widely regarded as a good thing for the Trump administration, and it made, a lot of people believe it made Trump look good, especially presidential was a term that a lot of people like to use in these circumstances to describe how he appeared on stage and reading from his teleprompter, which I have to agree for the most part that it actually did appear quite good. He looked presentable on stage. He did go off script a few times, and those were probably his weaker moments. But I want to discuss specifically the female Democrats that were sitting in the House, because one of the biggest stories is about how they didn't clap for anything. Trump literally mentioned that he wants to sort out and find a cure for childhood leukemia. That's the sort of thing that anyone walking down the street, no matter your race, where you grew up, your income, your political beliefs, it shouldn't matter. You should be like, yeah, you know what? I agree that childhood leukemia is something that we should all try and find a cure for. Let's do that. It's kind of bullshit because we know that they've been searching for a cure for years, and there is literally hundreds of millions of dollars being pumped into this, and we know there's not much the president can do to help that. He's not a scientist. I don't think he actually even has a proper university degree, but nevertheless, it's the sort of thing that everyone should have just clapped for. Like, sure, stand up and clap. The president wants to help kids who are suffering from cancer, and we should all want that too. But no, the Democrats didn't. They didn't stand up and clap. And I can use many examples of times that I think they probably should have stood up and clapped because, he said things that went along with the Democrat Party lines, and he said things that certain Democrats have said in the past, and they probably should have stood up and said, yeah, you're right, you got this one right, sir. But this one with kids who suffer from cancer, that they didn't stand up and give them, that bullshit fake round of applause where you pretend to be into what the president's saying even though you're really not. Just stand up and clap for the guy just for 30 seconds. Not even 10 seconds. Give him 10 seconds of applause. But they didn't. The only time they stood up was when the president mentioned how many women are working in Congress today. They literally clapped for themselves. And I didn't understand this until I was actually watching a discussion of this on The View, when they kind of agreed, everyone at the table agreed, that they think the women were actually trolling the president on this. Now, there are times where I think it's completely right that you need to use, I'm the last person who's going to tell you that don't go for the joke, don't go for the troll, comedy doesn't belong in politics. I think it absolutely does. But at a State of the Union where a couple minutes before you decided not to stand up because the president wants to help kids who have cancer, but now you're going to stand up because you have a fucking job now? Like, yay, look at me, I got elected, I won the popularity contest, more women won the popularity contest than ever before, yay! Like, what? What the hell are you talking about? That's not something that you should be proud of. That's not the one thing that you should look back and be like, yeah, we stood up because there's women working in Congress. No, you should be like, look, we stood up because there were kids who are suffering from cancer today that hopefully in 5 or 10 years from now never will again. That's the sort of thing you should stand up for. It's the sort of thing that goes beyond party lines. But they only stood up to things that fit their party's view of the way it should be. Now, also, all of these women were dressed in white as a throwback to the suffragette movement. And, the idea of getting women rights and getting women specifically the right to vote, which is great, but it was a little bit strange because right now they aren't actually, other than you could have the debate that maybe fighting for freedom of choice in the abortion argument, that could be the women's right that they're fighting for right now. But I don't really think that that's what this was about. This was about saying, look, we're all here, we finally made it here, and we're going to wear white to represent the fact that all of the women who came before us got us here. And it's like, that's all well and good, but you're going to do that at Donald Trump's State of the Union? Shouldn't you host a woman in politics event? Like, don't you have that power? I'm sure that every single television company would televise it, and you can get fucking Beyonce and Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama and all these powerful female figures that the left wing in U.S. politics has a lot of control over and has a lot of say in where they appear, and they can get them out to these events. Why not get them out to that sort of event? And then you can all wear white, and it's all going to be televised, and they'll put it on the 6 o'clock news spot instead of trying to overcome what is now a standard annual political event where the president just tells you about his party plans. Because now no one is talking about the suffragette movement. No one is talking about how far women have come in politics. They're only talking about the fact that, look, women only stood for their own beliefs. They only stood up for themselves. They didn't even stand for kids with cancer. That's what I have a problem with the State of the Union. I think the Democrats screwed up. I think they could have come out on top had they not only stood when they were told to stand. That was a little bit of a strange thing. One Democrat stood on his own because he had signed a bill bipartisan with a few Republicans. He stood and clapped for his own bill. Other than that, no one ever stood unless they were told to stand, and they all stood together and clapped. That's not how politics should be. It should be about being an individual and representing your constituents, representing the people who put you there, not about representing the party who pays for you to be there. That's the problem that I have with that. In other news, Hawaii this week has announced that lawmakers are considering raising the smoking age to 100. So, soon the tables will turn, and we will all have to yell down to the basement at Grandma and the gang, "Hey, you better not be smoking down there, Grandma." A USB stick was found by a marine biologist in New Zealand, frozen in seal shit. You can't make that one up. Experts say they tracked the owners down with some camera footage that was saved to the drive. I believe this was a public service announcement, actually, reminding people not to save porn onto your mobile flash sticks because they always go missing. Also, the German Bratwurst Museum has canceled really bad plans, I'll add, to move to the former Buchenwald concentration camp. That's right, people pay to look at old sausages somewhere other than Pornhub. In an apparent attempt to get young people back into church, the Pope has used an iPad with the Click to Pray app, allowing for millions around the world to pray all together simultaneously, no matter where they happen to be. However, there's no word yet on any defenses to stop priests from clicking to pray on young boys around the world. And lastly, UFO hunters are losing their minds as NASA astronaut Scott Kelly, who was once aboard the ISS, the International Space Station, recently posted a photo to Instagram which they claim has a UFO in one of the top, it's in the top right-hand corner. So let me rephrase that. Morons think that UFOs were accidentally revealed by an official space program account. This is the point in the show where I want to ask you to please tell all of your friends and family about the podcast. To be a part of the show, you can go to laughtolearnpodcast.com and use the contact page. Hit me up about anything that's discussed on the show or anything you want discussed on the show. Send me all of your fan mail and your love letters or your hate mail and, I don't know, hate letters. I don't know what the opposite of a love letter is. You can also reach me, as I mentioned already, on Twitter and Instagram. And don't forget to rate us with 5 stars everywhere you can and share this podcast all over the place. Later this week, we should be appearing on every single podcasting platform, from Spotify to iTunes to Google Play. And if we're not available on your favorite platform, or if one of your friends says that they can't find us in a specific country or on a specific app, please let me know, and we will do all that we can to get it streaming for you wherever you listen to your podcasts. As I mentioned, it should be live everywhere later this week. I'm just waiting on both Google Play and iTunes for approval, but it's out there. I've sent it off. I've done all that I can for now. I talked with the iTunes people for an hour on Sunday this week, and it looks like it's going to work for me. It looks like it's going to go through no problem. And as of, I believe it was 2 days ago now, we're live on Spotify. So it's only going up from here. We're only spreading out. Soon enough, we'll be doing our marketing push to get us spread across the globe. But for now, just share the podcast, tell people about it, have conversations about it. I hope I'm driving conversation among you, and I know it's certainly making me think about things a little bit more. And if all that I do is encourage you to just open a news article on your computer one day a week, then I've done my job. So come back every single Tuesday and tell your friends too. It's only going to get better. We should be over the tech humps, and it should be really good moving forward. So we are going to go on to our feature article this week about video game violence and what is happening in the great state, one of my favorite states actually to visit. I was just there 2 years ago, I believe it was, 3 years ago now, the state of Pennsylvania. Not Transylvania. There's no vampires, but Pennsylvania, like a pencil. Pennsylvania. 3 Pennsylvania-based lawmakers, 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, have proposed House Bill number 109, which would impose what they are calling a sin tax. A sin tax, S-I-N, sin as in the Bible, tax, on video games rated M or AO, so M for mature or AO being adult only, by the ESRB, as well as establishing a digital protection for school safety account in the state's funding. When asked about how this bill is not censorship, the Republican involved, Chris Quinn, said, quote, "This bill does not prohibit video games with violence. Instead, it simply provides a revenue stream. It tries to recoup some of the societal costs to make our schools safer by taxing an industry that has been shown to lead to violence," end quote. Now, this is the second similar bill to be tabled by this group in as many years, but last year's bill did not make its way to the General Assembly, and there's still no word yet on whether or not this bill will make its way to a vote, but it was proposed earlier last week. The fascinating thing about this bill, in my mind, is just how dated this line of thinking really is. We have the highest rate of suicide ever, and the average lifespan, in the United States at least, has dropped last year because of drug overdoses and suicides combined. It's the first time in almost 100 years that our average lifespan has dropped. The first time since the last World War that the average lifespan of an American has gone down. That's incredible. Yet, we have lawmakers entirely focused on making money rather than solving real problems, because this bill makes them money. This is what their donors want to see. It gets the problem away from guns, puts it on another industry, and their pockets still get filled each and every quarter. Last year, the President of the United States even said, quote, "I'm hearing more and more people saying the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts." End quote. The President sure hears a lot of people talk. He sure does. But I would be surprised if you didn't sit him down, and if he could actually use dual analog sticks, get him playing a game of COD, if he didn't get absolutely obsessed with blowing people's heads off. Either way, that was a side note. According to both the American Psychological Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics, violent video games should be avoided at all costs by young people, and they believe there is a direct link between media violence and aggressive behavior. After reading this, I, like apparently millions of people and specifically millions of gamers around the world, was a little bit angry. But rather than shooting someone, I decided to do some reading, and specifically to read the report that has led to the most recent decision stating that video games are inherently evil, and I found something which can only be described as incredible. The APA, which is as I mentioned earlier, the American Psychological Association, listed specifically violent video games which were used in their research. And, of course, the obvious titles made it in, such as Gears of War, Mortal Kombat, Call of Duty, Battlefield, etc. All the ones that we all know. However, and Grand Theft Auto need not be mentioned. However, two titles that were specifically highlighted were Manhunt and Thrill Kill. These are two 20-plus-year-old games with 32-bit graphics and more jank than a twerking stripper. However, that's not the most irrelevant game or the most irrelevant games that I noticed on the list. Pokemon Go was listed as a violent video game to be avoided by children. Maybe you'll remember. It was the one where 25-year-olds were getting hit by cars and trespassing in order to catch virtual pets on their cell phones. Yeah, that game. It also had a huge controversy because you're not able to fight people in the game. The only battles happen between AI, and there are not even fight animations. You just tap the screen a lot, and health levels go down. Now, I am absolutely one for violence in the media, freedom of expression and speech, to whatever degree it goes. I even think that there doesn't need to be restrictions on what is televised or broadcast on radio. As long as there's a warning, I think it's up to parents to decide what their kids will watch. And if your kids watch it behind your back, that's literally your problem. You need to figure that out. You can have parental controls on everything now, and there's more than enough reason to stop your kids from being able to browse the internet or satellite TV without restriction. So you really need to get a hold on your kids yourself, in my opinion. But I will listen to the argument that after a loss in a video game, there may be a window of time where someone acts irrationally and uncontrollably and perhaps even violently. However, I can't listen to any argument where Pokemon Go is used as a prime example of a cause for aggression in children. If you've never played the game, seriously, download it right now. It's free. It's the one where you walk around outside and throw Pokeballs on your screen and catch Pokemon. It's almost not even a game, and it's kind of a joke. There's no violence in it at all. I think that we as a society forget that only 70 years ago, we sent 18-year-olds to war in Europe, and real violence was more prevalent in daily life even than it is in today's media. Today, if someone's bleeding, we make our kids look away. They don't often attend funerals, and we project an image of a perfect world towards them through their television shows, their YouTube videos, and their video games. Now, I don't think we should have minors watching the BBC World News every day. That seems like a bad idea. There's no need to present so much negativity onto today's children. But maybe we should be finding and conducting research into how humans react with no violence in their lives through development. Because that's a real experiment that we're learning about now. Because kids who were a little bit younger than me, who are going through college right now, they're the ones we hear about in colleges across the Western world, really, right now. These are the ones who grew up with no violent movies, no violent television cartoons, no violent video games. And what did we get from it? Microaggressions, trigger warnings, students protesting political pundits like Ben Shapiro and comedians like Bill Maher as protesting them as far-right individuals just because they don't like the way those men think. Now, neither of those two are even remotely close to the far right, and it doesn't take much intelligence to realize that. But that's the problem, is that most of us above, and this doesn't include everyone in this age group, of course, but the majority of people above the age of 22 or 23 will be able to process the fact that someone like Ben Shapiro, even if you don't agree with him, I mean, he's a Jewish Republican. He's a conservative Jew. He's not far right. He's not a Nazi. And that's literally what people are saying, that he's a Nazi. He's literally Jewish. He's like, you as a non-Jew are always going to be more of a Nazi or more likely to become a Nazi than Ben Shapiro. And yet they're like actively campaigning against him, getting him to stop speaking at events. And with Bill Maher, I would say the same thing. Bill Maher is anti-religion. He's been quite open about that. He has literally the most profitable and his film Religulous. It's, I guess, an anti-religion biography. It's really just a look at the realities of religion. He's made more money on it than anyone else ever in the religious space for documentaries. And people are campaigning against him because he talks against Muslims. He speaks out quite openly that he thinks that there is a problem in the Muslim church, not about Muslim people themselves, if you just look into his argument. But young people see it as black and white. Mom didn't let me play Grand Theft Auto when I was younger because it is bad. Bill Maher says bad things, therefore Bill Maher should not be listened to. No one should want to or be forced to listen to him. It's strange, really. And I think that a certain amount of aggression, violence, and uncomfortable situations seem to be essential to developing intelligent and strong-minded people who can separate these different categories, who can fight for what they believe in respectfully, and who also understand that there's a cost to losing beyond getting a participation award. Who knows? Maybe buying a hooker in GTA and then killing her to get your money back would have helped these kids realize that disagreements happen in the real world, and you need to think, because all of your actions have consequences. Then again, maybe all it does is lead to legalized pot and prostitution. Either way, I, for one, fail to see the downside. So I thought I had written a whole lot more for this episode, but it looks like it's going to be a little bit shorter, but we still have to go through my weekly rant. So this week, a buddy of mine is preparing for an amateur Muay Thai fight. Now, Muay Thai is essentially kickboxing with a strange-looking headband on. Either way, these are sanctioned amateur fights, so you have to do the whole doctor thing and blood work and prove that you're not taking some strange steroids or that you're not going to give some guy HIV or whatever. But since we live in Canada, it's all free. What up? Either way, I was super interested in the process, specifically because I've been reading a whole lot lately about transgender individuals competing in sport. And this is kind of an offshoot of what we discussed last week. And now, no one finding out that this has been going on for years is really what's made me interested in this, because some people have been getting away with it for a very long time. So I asked him exactly how they verify your gender. And he tells me they said, "What's your gender?" I said, "Male." And the doctor said, "Okay." And that was mind-blowing to me, that the doctor doesn't even check, didn't even make sure that you're not sending a testosterone-rigged trans man to fight a natural-born man. And I hate the term cis. I'm really not going to use that term. It's absolutely ridiculous. You have a trans and a natural, and that's the way that I think it should be. It's ridiculous that we're creating all of these ridiculous terms. But my buddy quickly corrected me, because he said that it was a female doctor and that I almost couldn't handle. I mean, first we let women vote, and now we're going to let them do this? I mean, seriously though. The real problem here is trans women fighting unknowing cis women. So it's someone who was born a woman is fighting someone who used to be a man. That's a big problem. There was a trans woman, and this is specifically, I think, with fighting and one-on-one aggressive sports where someone can get seriously hurt. Now, there was a trans woman who had several professional fights and beat the hell out of naturally born cis women, even coming close to a title before anyone realized what was happening. And this is someone who was a man for over 20 years, who I'll give the benefit of the doubt to, that this was a genuine transition and it wasn't done for career or financial gain, that, that this was, that it was genuine. But still, this man became a woman and within a few months was bashing girls' faces in at the professional fighting level. And you can watch the fights online. It is a full-grown man beating on a woman. That's literally what it looks like. You've seen women get beat on in the movies before. That's what this looks like, and it's really, really it's actually uncomfortable to watch, especially knowing that this did used to be a man. This individual was a transgendered woman. Now, the problem I have with this, as I mentioned before, is that it was never mentioned. She never said who she used to be or anything about her transition. And after it came out, there have been women who have agreed to fight her, and actually she's lost fights. And I think that's completely legitimate. If you know that this person was essentially on testosterone for 20 years, then yeah, I have no problem. Let them fight. I think if Ronda Rousey wants to fight Brock Lesnar in the UFC in a legitimate fight, I mean, I'd say don't do it. But if she wants to do it, if she thinks she can make him tap out, I'm going to watch that pay-per-view. And I think everyone agrees with that. That if you know all of the information going into it, no one's going to stop you. I don't think there's any reason why a trans woman wouldn't be able to have a professional fighting career against other women, but those women have to know who you are, because it's seriously unfair if they don't. You can look at, fight records for everyone. I mean, like, everyone. You can look at every single fight they've ever had that was sanctioned and how they did, who they fought. There's even some companies that post like punch counts and kick counts and how many attempts you took at takedowns and submissions. It's crazy, like the information you have on fighters. But for some reason, we think that it's a privacy issue to say that you are transgendered. I don't really know about that. I think when you're fighting, when you've given up your body and someone else is giving up their body for this one-on-one competition, all the cards have to be out on the table. Now, in a little bit more of a questionable situation earlier this year, I guess late last year because it's February now, the first trans woman to win a cycling race won a World Cup event out in Seattle. And just doesn't that just make you pause and think that it's a little bit unfair? I mean, like, I agree that these individuals they're no longer men and they can't compete with men, and we can't stop them from competing altogether, and there are not enough transgendered people. Again, as I mentioned before, last week we're talking about less than 1% of the population. We can't give them their own category. That's what people are saying. That's ridiculous. But they're also not biologically women, and they had all of these years of testosterone. And to expect a natural-born cis woman to ever have a chance against these individuals is simply unfair. And I'll just leave you with this, because I seriously have no idea what the answer is here. I think the way we're doing things now, we're letting trans women compete with women, we're letting trans men compete with men. I think that's the way that it has to stay for now until someone can come up with a better idea. But Serena Williams is by far one of the greatest female tennis players of all time. She's the man, figuratively. Shout out to School of Rock. She lost a competitive game to a college male ranked in the low 200s in the world a few years ago. And she stated that she couldn't dream of even qualifying for a men's tournament. And when pressed by the media to play Roger Federer a few years ago, she laughed and she said there's no chance. Because when you compare women's statistics in tennis to men's, the top-ranking women are literally uncompetitive. Like, she would not stand a chance. She lost to a college player. That's the difference we're talking about genetically. And I don't know what the right answer is, but what I do know is that it's not fair. That is all that we have for this week's episode of the Laugh to Learn podcast. I would like to thank you all for tuning in and coming back this week. Please tell your friends, tell your family, share. Follow me on Twitter at Jacob Paveo, on Instagram at Jacob_Paveo, hashtag shameless self promo. Visit the website, laughtolearnpodcast.com. If you're listening to this by Thursday or later, please check on your favorite podcast streaming service, whether it's iTunes or Spotify. I know we're already on Spotify, or Google Play, or any other of those podcast apps. They should be there. I should be everywhere later this week. So tell everyone, listen to the podcast. It's only going to get better. My writing is only going to get better. It's going to become less corny, more good. And I am Jacob Paveo, and as always, I will see you next Tuesday.